I've been single my entire life. I don't really mind it. It's just how I've always been. And yet, I still buy Valentine's candy and a card every year. That simple thing saves my life. I moved to a small town right before starting high school. It was difficult trying to make new friends and adjusting to an entirely new place at the same time. By the time February rolled around, I was finally feeling as if I'd gotten into the groove of things. I had only made a handful of friends, and to my shock, the first time I was ever asked out on a date was a week before Valentine's Day. I felt awkward going out with a girl who I'd never spoken with before, so I turned her down. She got angry, claiming she had other options and was just being nice. That might be the case, but her extreme reaction confused me. When I was able to, I asked my friend Travis about it. "Oh yeah, you die if you're single on Valentine's Day. Get your heart ripped out and everything. So, find a girlfriend for the day," he explained, and I scoffed at the idea. "Come on, you don't expect me to believe that, do you?" I asked, thinking he was just pulling a joke on the new kid. He acted as if he was just giving me some facts. He was looking at me as if I was crazy for not knowing about getting a date or dying. I told him he was crazy, but he just shook his head. It happens every year. Someone gets the heart ripped out. It might not be in this town, but it's nearby, and it's always someone single. "I guess you can risk it, but why? It's just one day," he said, trying to defend his point. This was before everyone had a cell phone in their pocket, so I couldn't look up deaths of people missing their hearts right then. I made a note to research it later, so I could call him out on his urban legend. I crossed my arms, still not buying what he was saying. "That's stupid. Are you saying, what? Someone knows you're single and kills you?" I pressed. "A person doesn't do it. Some sort of monster does. No one has lived after seeing it, but people said they heard drums and then found someone without their heart." Travis was again looking at me, as if I should know all this. "A Valentine's Day monster? Really? Well, Christmas has Santa, and there is an Easter Bunny, so why can't Valentine's Day have something?" For the next 10 minutes, I roasted his idea and belief in the Valentine's Day monster. At least he could take it all as a joke, even if he did believe the murders were real. He wasn't positive a monster was doing it, but couldn't offer up any other reasons behind the deaths. And he wasn't risking it. He already had a date lined up with a girl he didn't even like. I still thought the entire idea was dumb. The rest of the school didn't share my outlook. As the days slowly got closer and closer to the fated day, the students got paired up with each other. Some done out of safety, others using the monster as an excuse to finally ask out their crush. I received a few pity offers, but I refused all of them as an act of rebellion against this stupid small town's tradition. I just watched as everyone started dating in fear of death. The stores sold out of candy and cards pretty quick. Normally, everywhere would be flooded with red and pink products. The shelves were barren a few days before the 14th. Now, I refused to accept any offers, and I didn't plan on asking someone else either. The school offered a program where you could buy sweet heart candies to be delivered to class for a small fee. I didn't mind getting one each of my new friends, all while making up silly names to put on the card of who they would receive it from. It was the only thing related to the whole day I gave into, aside from buying a box of chocolates for myself. The chocolates were just a normal box of assorted types from the grocery store I'd gotten with some money made from doing chores. When I bought them, the cashier slapped a heart-shaped sticker on the box without my permission. A small one for someone to write who the box was meant for. With how crazy this town was over the holiday, I didn't blame her. By that time, I'd been so overexposed to anything Valentine related, just seeing the sticker put me off eating the chocolates. I shoved them in my backpack to forget about them until after the 14th was over. I really wish I had taken the entire thing a bit more seriously. It wasn't until the night before Valentine's Day that I finally looked up the murders, finding them to be true. Dread started to form in my stomach as I scrolled through the library computer after school while waiting for my father to pick me up. I didn't find all the mysterious deaths, but enough to make me worried. 3 people were found with their hearts missing. The police said that from the state of their bodies, they were killed on Valentine's Day, even though their bodies weren't found right away. An entire town was warning me about this, and yet I still sat in shock after finding out it was true. My father finally got me from school, but told me I needed to walk home the next day. I sat in the car, silently debating on what to do. He just chalked up my distressed mental state as normal teenage behaviour. I didn't sleep that night. I tried thinking of names of students that might not have a date, all while knowing it was useless. When the clock turned midnight and it was officially the 14th, I nearly had a panic attack, convinced the monster would swoop in to take my heart. The only way I got through that night without a mental breakdown was to shift my train of thought back to what it was before looking up the murders. Valentine's Day monster was stupid. It wasn't real. Some heartless store manager saw the murders and made up the story to sell more products through fear. That was it. It had to be it. I remained awake all night. In the morning, my mother noticed how I looked and offered to let me stay home. I refused, secretly hoping I could find a date if I went to school. The place was abuzz with new couples and gift exchanges. As I walked down the hallway, a few students looked at me with pity in their eyes. Most knew my single stance and how I would be the monster's top choice, if it was real. No one went near me that day if they could help it. My few new friends awkwardly tried to find reasons to rush off if I tried talking to them. All of them having temporary new girlfriends gave them a good enough reason to be left out. My candy heart prank wasn't funny. Some thought it was, but I couldn't find the humour in anything that day. Instead, I spent it looking over my shoulder, expecting to hear drums at any second. The final bell rang, and Travis was brazen enough to walk over to me for a chat. I think he thought this was going to be our last conversation. The idea got him motivated enough to walk over, but not to find the words. Do you, want to come over? I'm going out today, but maybe we can hang out beforehand. There's a really good show, and... He trailed off, feeling awkward. It's fine. I'll just chill at home. My parents are going out and won't be home until after dinner, so I have the entire place to myself. That never happens. They finally think I'm old enough to be trusted to be left alone. I explained, determined to still not believe in this nonsense, even though I was terrified. Travis nodded, looking pale. He wasn't brave enough to press me on hanging out. After all, he was certain that I was going to die that night. He didn't want to be around to see it. I'll talk to you tomorrow, I said, and gave him a shaky wave. He gave one back and started to hurry over to his new girlfriend. When you're a teenager, everything's a big deal. As I walked away from school towards home, I felt like I was walking towards my own death. The sky was overcast. It made me feel even more gloomy. I kept mocking myself for my mood as I walked along the neighbourhoods that had become familiar to me over the past few months. Finding a small rock, I started to kick it as I walked, trying to take my mind off the fear in my chest. A car started to drive along behind me with such loud music I could hear it thumping through the air. I watched it cruise by, a bit annoyed over the sound. If you're going to blast music, at least play something good, not something that just thudded. As the car kept going down the streets, the music went with it, but a hint of the thudding remained. I stopped, confused on why I could still hear the sound if the car was so far away. When it finally turned out of sight, I realised the car wasn't the source of all the noise. My heart started to beat so fast and hard, it matched the thudding rhythm that I could swear was getting closer and closer. I didn't look behind me or even get angry at myself for getting scared. I just ran down the street. I should have run up to one of the houses asking for help. I was so frightened, nothing rational came to mind. I ran like crazy, all while that beating followed. I wished this was a prank, but didn't stop running to find out. My mind was unable to work as my lungs burned from the mad dash. For a moment, I thought I was losing whatever was chasing me. I stumbled, nearly falling over a crooked sidewalk square in front of my house. I couldn't tell how close the thumping sound was over my own heart. Sweat poured down my face, and I felt faint. I slammed into my front door, banging on it before I remembered my parents were out. I nearly screamed in frustration. The door was locked, and my keys were buried under my books inside my backpack. That thudding sound was all I heard. It was so close, it rumbled in my chest. My hands shook as I fumbled to get the zipper open. I was scared to death and couldn't keep my eyes open. Squeezing them shut, I felt around in my bag for my key. My hand brushed against it when a pull of wind came across my face. I smelled something sweet, and then the wind came again. To my horror, my mind clued into the fact that it wasn't the wind, but something breathing on my face. It was too late. Even if I got my key, I couldn't unlock the door before whatever brought the heart-thumping sound took my heart too. I refused to open my eyes to see the monster I now knew to be real. I love the sound of your heart. It's a shame it's alone. Let me add it to the others. The voice that spoke wasn't some prank. It was twisted and beyond anything a human could make. My mind was racing. I felt a sharp tip of a claw poke on my chest, leaving a small cut through my shirt. A cruel laugh came as I whimpered in fear. With my hands still in my backpack, I felt something that was not my books or my house key. A crazy idea came to mind. It was either that or death, so I grabbed a hold of the only thing I could think of. Yanking the box of chocolates from my bag, I held it out to the monster I still refused to see. My voice strained and shaking, I asked it a question I prayed would save my life. Will you be my Valentine's this year? My heart nearly beat out of my chest. Opening my eyes a crack, I could see the box in my hand, but not the creature that brought along countless heartbeats that mixed in with my own. I should have died. Instead of clawing out my heart, the twisted hand with razor-sharp nails reached out and took the box. I forced my eyes shut, my entire body shaking. Something brushed my face, causing me to tense up so much it hurt. That clawed finger brushed some hair from my face with another cruel laugh. What a cute child you are. I'll accept this gift this year, but someday I'll be back to claim your heart. I bit down on my tongue, trying not to scream at that horrible voice. With one final laugh that rattled my bones, the thudding stopped. It took me forever before I gathered up the courage to open my eyes. Nothing was on the front step. I was alone. If it wasn't for the rip in my shirt, I would have thought the whole thing came about due to stress and lack of sleep. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I mean, who would believe me? I went to school for the first half of the day on the 15th. I had barely slept for 2 days and needed to take the rest of the day off. But I didn't want my friends to think I died. All of them looked shocked I'd lived. I just said I got lucky. The school moved on. The short-lived relationships caused by that day fizzed out. As time crept along, I started to dread knowing Valentine's Day was coming yet again. I bought more candy, roses, and a card, expecting a visit from a monster. I should have just gone along and dated someone, but somehow the idea of it was more stressful than dealing with a monster. I anticipated and feared Valentine's Day, only to have nothing happen. Nothing happens besides the fact that the gifts I addressed to the creature go missing overnight. As the years carried on, I kept buying different gifts with the same results. As I've gotten older, I've heard those terrible heartbeats faintly on Valentine's Day. Each year, the sound gets louder. I think this year is finally going to be when that monster shows itself. Again, just asking someone else saved my life. But I think if the monster does show up, I'll ask it the question yet again. But this time, I'll keep my eyes open. I have made a terrible mistake. Around 2 a.m, I noticed I didn't have any snacks in my cupboards. A corner store was open all night, and I debated on if I wanted to go out for something. Insomnia kicked my ass most days, so I wasn't going to be asleep anytime soon. Going to the store would at least give me something to do. Grabbing my phone, I headed out, unaware of what this short trip was about to turn into. The store was 3 blocks away. Outside, it was a bit chilly, but as I walked, I felt warm enough to keep my coat open. The streets were completely empty due to how late it was, and the night was silent aside from my footsteps. I walked about a block, checking my phone to clear any useless notifications, when out of the corner of my eyes, something small caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a doll between 2 trash bags on the curb. When the doll darted to a closed storefront to look inside the dark window, I realised what I was looking at. A small girl was out in the middle of the night, alone. She was wearing a dark red dress, and her hair was dark and so long it went past her waist. I didn't hesitate to rush over to her. She appeared to be around 5, but I was bad at guessing children's ages. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing out here? Are you cold?" Her face was pressed against the glass, so I didn't see what she looked like until she took my offered hand. When she looked up, I felt a rush of fear overtake my body. I didn't understand what I was looking at. A child out alone was odd enough, but her face just stopped all the gears in my brain. Her eyes were black, a solid black. No pupils, just a void of colour. A small part of me tried to tell myself that they were coloured contacts, but the smarter part was screaming that no company made contact lenses for kids that young. I wanted to think that because of the lack of light, I was seeing things. For a half a second, I was able to believe that until she smiled, her mouth opening literally from ear to ear. Crooked, sharp teeth that could disembowel an adult in seconds were gleaming in the very faint light. And she was holding my hand. If I wanted to make out of this unharmed, I needed to think fast. She was already drooling over a nice, tasty meal, walking right up to her. "Are you hungry? I can, buy you some snacks." My voice trembled and my palms started to sweat. She stared up, dark eyes not blinking, and mouth still spread in the wide grin. More drool started to pool at the corner of her mouth, and I really thought she was going to take a chunk out of my hand. Finally, she took a small step forward, and with the strength of someone 3 times her size, dragged me forwards. Stumbling, I followed her, still holding hands, and with my heart rattling in my chest. Her small feet and polished doll shoes clicked on the sidewalk as we walked down 1 block. From her grip strength, it was clear I couldn't just toss her aside. Running didn't seem to be a good option either. Playing along to see how it went was the best idea. We stopped in front of the store I had already planned on going to. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the night as we both stared at the building, waiting for the other to make the first move. She let go of my hand and I rubbed it. Her small hands gripped me so tight, I felt bruised. Could I call for help once I was inside? Or just hide, hoping she went away? Glancing down, drool was dripping off her chin, and that was motivation enough to go inside to buy some snacks. If I was lucky, those snacks would save my life. I got a little bit of everything. Some chocolate bars, some chips and jerky. Aside from people, what did monster girls eat? Sugar? People? I could only hope I picked out something to distract her long enough for me to make a run for it. The clerk noticed how stressed I was, but our exchange was mostly silent. I wasn't going to put a second person in danger. A short pause at the door to gather my courage was needed. I just needed to feed a little monster and then go home. That was the plan, but that did not happen. When I walked out of the store, the girl slammed into my legs so hard I was knocked over. The bags spilled out, chip bags and chocolate bars skidding onto the street. She wasted no time snatching them up to shove them in her mouth, wrappers and all. My wrist hit the sidewalk hard, causing pain to throb up my arm. I sat in fear and awe, unable to get up and make the planned run for it. The child scurried around like a feral animal, eating through my pitiful monthly snack budget in just a few minutes. When nothing remained, she looked over her shoulder on all fours. My life flashed before my eyes as she came closer. A small hand reached out and grabbed my good wrist. With some force, she dragged me back to my feet and nearly took my arm out of my joint in the process. I was sweating from fear. She was fed and I no longer had any bargaining chips. At least, I didn't think I did. She started to pull on my arm to make me take a few steps away from the store. Both arms felt hot from pain. Her free hand pointing off into the darkness, and what she wanted finally came to mind. "Do you want to play in the park?" I asked the little creature. She let out a screech that could have been of pure joy or a threat. It was hard to tell. A park was a short walk away from the store. I'd never gone myself because I didn't have any kids or younger siblings, but I cut through it sometimes on my way home from work. She wasn't going to eat me yet, so I followed her to the park. Once we arrived, she let out another shriek and ran off to the slides. She kicked off her shoes and left them behind. I could have left then, but judging by how fast this little monster ran, she could catch up and rip my legs off if she wanted. Even though she hadn't really shown any signs of aggression yet, I didn't want to risk it. She grew bored of the slide quickly. The first few trips were going down it normally, then the last 3 she was kicking off from the top, just to see how fast she could launch herself down the plastic tube. I flinched each time her body slammed into the wood chips. Without any sign of an injury, she got back up to dust off her new torn dress. Getting back to all fours, she took off towards the swings, kicking up grass and dirt. How did I get roped into babysitting a supernatural creature in the middle of the night? As I watched her try and figure out how swings worked, I looked around the empty park. Lately, there hadn't been too many kids playing around, because small animals were found torn apart around the area of the equipment lately. Squirrels and birds murdered in large numbers freaked out the local parents. Thankfully, it wasn't any dogs or cats. I really can't deal with seeing dead pets. 2 days ago, a homeless man that lingered in the area went missing. All that was left behind was some blood and torn clothing. It really convinced parents to not use this park. My head snapped back towards the girl, putting all those facts together. It wasn't a coincidence that dead animals and a missing person showed up shortly before I ran into her. Getting ready to run, I checked to see if she was even paying any attention to the only other person around. She'd gotten bored of the swings quickly as hell. For a moment, she sat gathering up the wood chips in a pile. My chest tightened when she looked up, but not in my direction. Instead, she waved at something I didn't see. Going back to her pile, she placed the long stick she found in the middle. Again, she darted off on all fours, leaping into the metal climbing equipment with a thud that echoed through the night. I could have left, but something kept me standing and watching. She didn't look as if she was really playing. At moments, she would pause to interact with someone who wasn't there. The interactions were odd enough to keep my attention. It was as if she was addressing other children, pausing at the top of the slide as she waited before going down. My mind filled in the blanks. She was acting as if the park was full and she was playing with other children. At first, I thought maybe she was seeing ghosts or something I couldn't see, but that thought freaked me out and I dismissed it. Was she acting like this because she was just copying how she saw other kids act? Being so focused on my own thoughts, I didn't even notice her coming over. A slap of a small hand brought me back. She slapped my leg hard enough for it to sting, then darted away, looking over her shoulder, watching. When I just stood there, not understanding what was going on, she ran back and slapped me again. A bit more forceful the second time. Again, she ran a few steps, tense like a wild animal. A theory came to mind that was quickly proven as correct. She wanted to play tag. Play or get eaten? I went with the better option, but it really wasn't a game of tag because I didn't catch her, not even close. Whenever I was close, she cheated by going on all fours to race through the wet grass, her small shape a blur of motion. I wasn't in shape and needed to stop very soon after the game started. Was hide and seek next? If it was, I would just leave. That idea was pushed aside when the little creature spotted something in the bushes near the entrance of the park. Her eyes appeared to get larger on her small face, and her mouth opened so wide, it looked as if it was big enough to swallow a watermelon. Whatever animal was in the bushes didn't stand a chance. Disappearing into the bush, horrible, blood-curdling screams came from something not human. It was impossible to know if it was her or the animals she had found that was making these noises. I was frozen to the spot, again questioning what brought me here. She came out, face dripping with blood. Her dress was torn and stained. Her bare feet were covered in mud. We made eye contact, and she simply coughed up a clot of bloodied fur. I was going to have nightmares for the rest of my life because of this. My entire body tensed and skin crawled when she came over and sat next to where I was frozen in fear. Silently, she stared up at the sky, her toes wiggling. Snapping from her trance, she looked at my face with a smile. This time, it didn't look as creepy as before. Raising a small hand, she gave a few waves and looked back at the sky. Did that wave mean she was done hanging out with me? Could I leave? Testing it out, I took one step away, then another. The distance between us grew, and I nearly made it out without any injuries. Instead of doing the smart thing and just leaving, I opened up my dumb mouth. If you're in the area, you can come and see me anytime. I mentally kicked myself for saying such a thing. Yes, she did look like a child, but she also looked like a nightmare. Why in the hell did I offer to hang out again? The little thing smiled away, only giving me another few waves. I needed to get the hell out of there before I did something stupid again. Getting back home only took a few minutes. Kicking off my shoes, the first thing I did was get into bed. Unable to sleep, I stared at the ceiling, wondering what the hell happened. No one would believe me, so I didn't plan on telling anyone the story to friends. If I didn't say something before leaving that girl in the park, I may have had a chance to forget about the entire thing. Nearly a week after the strange meeting, I fell asleep a little after midnight. It was very rare I was in bed and actually passed out before dawn. When grey light came through the bedroom windows, I woke up groggy and feeling the need to go to the washroom. Being so tired, I didn't notice anything different in my room at first. The bedroom door was open. I didn't remember opening it. I live alone, but closing the door was a habit I still held from growing up in a house full of noisy siblings. Then my eyes travelled over to the foot of my bed, where a lump that had not been there a few hours before made me jerk back, fully awake. There was something under my blankets. I kept telling myself a stray cat somehow got inside and curled up under the sheets, even though the sheet was too large for a cat. Knowing I couldn't ignore this, I lifted the blankets off in one swoop. The girl I'd met was curled up much like a cat would sleep, and a dead bird with a twisted neck stained my sheets. No matter how much I begged it all to be a dream, it didn't change the fact that she was there. Unable to think, I dumbly watched as she lifted her head looking dazed. Still, half asleep, she nudged the corpse of the bird away from her as an offering. No, thanks. You keep it. Hearing those words, she opened her mouth and snatched the bird up in one bite. Bones crunched and broke. Each snap made me curl up tighter and further away from the monster. Then her head fell back down on the mattress. When I was positive she wasn't going to wake up, I ran to the washroom and locked the door. I could have called the police. I could have done a lot of things. Somehow, I chose the worst thing to do. I let her stay. 2 days have passed since she showed up. Aside from birds, she eats normal foods. I've been going to work, trying to act as normal as possible. When I arrive home, she's still there, either hanging out on the couch, staring at cartoons, or in a nest of blankets she made on my bed. Somehow, I've gotten her to take a bath and cleaned her dress as best I can, but I would need to get her new clothing. Honestly, I have no idea how long she's going to stay here for. Every time she kills a bird and chews on the brittle bones, I feel a chill, knowing if I upset her, I could be eaten next. This girl might stay for a while, or be gone tomorrow. Who knows what goes through the heads of monsters? Another mistake I made that night we met was I accidentally gave her a name. This creature that was decimating the local bird population and was an ever-looming threat on my life will now only answer to Sweetheart. I rarely went out drinking. Never by myself, and only if I was invited out by friends or co-workers and having a few. But I never had the goal of getting drunk. On a cold fall night, I hesitated outside a bar I've never entered before, watching my breath come out in white puffs. I wanted to get drunk that night, just black out the next few hours no matter the cost. This wasn't like how I normally felt, but my life now didn't feel normal. After that day, it was as if the world shifted into a darker one and I couldn't return how things were before. A weight of guilt pressed on my back and into the bar. I sat alone at the wooden bar, half listening to the random soccer game rerun on the mounted flat screens off to the side. I started off slow with a beer or two, letting myself feel miserable for a time before I drank something heavier. Picking at the damp label on the bottle, the dark feeling that drove me into this place started to overpower the rest of my senses. Someone sat next to me at the bar and ordered a beer, only to find himself a little short. He looked through a wrinkled grey suit jacket for a few seconds, muttering that he had more change somewhere. On reflection, I put down a few dollars on the counter to cover his drink and a tip for the bartender. The man turned his head towards me and gave a half smile as thanks. My head was a bit hazy from the drinks already, but I sobered up a little bit, seeing the man's face. A shock went down my spine, some sort of instinct telling me to run. I shook it off, wondering where the hell that feeling came from. He didn't look dangerous, or the kind of person you should avoid in a dark alley. His hair grey and pushed back with some strands coming loose, making him look to be overdue for a haircut. His face didn't look old enough to be fully grey. A few wrinkles appeared at the corner of his mouth when he smiled, making me think he was only 10 years older than myself. His grey suit jacket and scuffed shoes made him appear like an underpaid office worker going to the bar for a drink after a long day. I brushed off the first jolt of that odd feeling, seeing him, and got back to drinking. I thought he wouldn't want to talk and just have a beer and then leave. I sensed eyes on me when I downed the last of my drink, debating on getting something stronger. A dark feeling came back, slowly drowning out the sounds of the bar. My stomach twisted and hands trembled slightly, with images of the news report coming to my mind. The reason why I came wanting to get blacked out, making my mouth taste bitter. Having a bad night? The voice cut through my feelings, causing me to swim back up through them to be the present. The man sat backwards on the stool to lean against the bar and placed both elbows on the counter. His head tilted in my direction and a half smile on his face. His voice sounded as if he smoked a pack every day of his life since he'd been born. His tone was so low, I was surprised I even heard him. Here, I thought talking to random strangers over a drink was something that only happened in movies or books. I've never gone out of my way to talk to someone while out in public, that was for sure. It's complicated, I told him, looking away, feeling far too raw. You covered my drink. The least I can do is listen, the stranger offered, with another smile that unnerved me. His body relaxed, and yet he gave off the air of a hunter. He wanted to hear the reason why I felt so miserable, for his own enjoyment. What are you, a therapist? I shot back, with a small sign of displeasure. Therapist would cost a lot more than half the price of a single beer, he replied, the smile turning into something a bit warmer. I hated the fact I laughed a little at his answer. Talking to a random stranger was safer than getting completely trashed that night. I doubted he would honestly care about anything I said, and just wanted to pass some time. I collected myself, trying to figure out the best way to word what got me in this downward spiral. I worked at a restaurant during the day. I have a night job, so those shifts were fine for me. The restaurant normally got busy at dinner time, and the tips were better, so I tried to prick up a night shift when I wasn't at my other job. A new girl started a month ago. Abby, she wasn't even 20 yet. I needed to stop talking for a moment. My throat is getting tight, and the words are not coming. The stranger waited patiently, his bottle of beer long since dismissed for something much more interesting. I didn't know what went on during the night shift. The night manager really acted creepy around all the younger girls they hired, until the quiet because of him. I found out about it when I took a later shift and saw him push past Abby and touched her on purpose. I threatened to kick his ass if he did that again, and he threatened to fire me. I think seeing someone defend her made Abby feel better about opening up, about what the guy was doing. She dismissed most of her accidents, though. I stopped to drink the rest of my bottle, hating how this story turned out. The man leaned back a little, wanting to hear more, but worried if he pressed, I would shut down. I knew telling him all of this didn't mean anything. It wouldn't change the past or bring back a poor girl that did nothing wrong. I went to the owner and brought proof of what went down. He fired me shortly after, and I figured out that the other manager is his cousin. A man who already did time for stalking and assault and should never be around younger girls. I started to get ready to sue them for firing me for no reason. That doesn't matter now. I should have focused on getting her to a safe place or dragged the cops over before... I stopped again, my stomach churning. Before the low tone came, the man leaning down as if he was shaving a secret. I heard on the news, Abby was found dead, strangled and assaulted. Jesus, she was only 19. If I said something to the right person, she would be alive. I can't stop thinking about that. I should have done so much more for her. The man leaned back, mentally chewing on what I told him. I didn't expect him to say anything comforting. I wanted to punish myself, tell the story. Not enough, though. It just wasn't fair a girl lost her life, and the man who did it wasn't arrested yet. They claim they don't have enough evidence, but by the time they do, he'll be long gone, targeting another girl. I wonder if some people go to church because they relate to the whole dying for other sins idea. You could do nothing wrong in life, and yet feel guilty for others' actions. Here you are, blaming yourself for her death, and yet you did nothing to cause it. Is your ego so large, you think you're on the same level as the Son of God? He was still leaning against the counter, a smug look on his face. My face flushed red and rage filled up to my stomach. I was to blame for at least some of what happened, and this guy tried to twist it all around. I wanted to punch that look off his face. Seeing my rage, his face only brightened. I realised that I felt something besides self-pity. He wanted me to get angry, and someone besides myself. "You're an ass, aren't you?" I asked, my rage simmering down. "You figured that out fast. Do you smoke?" He pulled out a packet of cigarettes from his suit pocket, and I shook my head. I quit a year ago, when I couldn't afford them. No, not anymore. I wondered if he was just going to leave it if I refused to have a smoke with him. "One won't hurt you. Come outside and clear your head." A hand landed on my shoulder. For some reason, I listened to him. I never talked to strangers, let alone followed them to the parking lot of a bar to accept a cigarette. The man pulled out a cheap orange disposable lighter that needed a few tries to get it to work. I shuddered in the cold, wrapping my arms under each one to stay warm. The smoke broke and the chilly air did clear my head a little. Oddly enough, I felt better after I recovered from hacking up a lung from taking a drab for the first time in over a year. "It's not your fault, you know. The only one responsible for that girl's death is the one who took her life. I pressured you into smoking, but you made the choice to come outside. Even if that man had a gun to his head and it was his life or hers, he would still be the one who chose his life." I wasn't expecting that kind of talk from someone who looked as scruffy as he did. I coughed again, the freezing air and smoke hurting my lips. I thought about what he said. It all made sense, and I knew what he was getting at, and yet I couldn't accept it. If I just got her to somewhere safe, a girl I barely knew would still be alive. How could I not be to blame for that? A dangerous glint came to his eyes when he knew I simply couldn't forgive myself. "If that man gets arrested, would it make you feel better?" he questioned. His voice took on a different tone than before, a hint of excitement in his words. He reminded me of a spider watching a fly get closer and closer to the web. The question led up to a trap I wasn't aware of just yet. "Yes," I said right away. My head turned, feeling the weight of the lie. "No, he's alive. She's not. How is that fair at all?" My words sounded thick in my mouth as my shoulders shook from emotion. I played it off as if I was just cold. I didn't turn around when the other man took a step closer. He was right behind me. I could smell the smoke of his cigarette mixing in with my own. Alarm bells went off in my head, and yet I didn't leave or move away. Goosebumps rose on my arms, my body tense, waiting for his voice. "Would you like to even the score?" The words came on the back of my neck and cemented into my brain. My heart twisted over the truth of it all. I did want to make it fair. I wanted the kill dead. I didn't have any say in the matter, though. I wasn't Abby's family, just a co-worker for a short while. I had no right answering the stranger at my back. The answer still came. "Would you do that for me?" I asked, carefully looking over my shoulder, unaware of what kind of person I just met. His grey eyes flickered in the darkness. A silver light came, but only lasted long enough for me to assume I was seeing things. His mouth turned into a smile, and for some reason, I thought his teeth looked too sharp. I never should have spoken to him. Getting drunk and wallowing in my grief would have been a better outcome of the night. Besides the whole moral debate, I risked getting arrested for murder if this man actually went through with my request. "I'll take care of this for you. You did cover my drink. Don't worry about the police being involved. The way I do things never causes the ones who hire me to get in any legal trouble. But I do ask for you to be present. during the confrontation. He started to walk around me and searched around his suit jacket looking for something. He handed over a card with his number handwritten on it, the scrap of paper feeling heavy in my hand. My brain is reeling from the idea of what I agreed to. A man's life for half the cost of a beer, I said, mostly to myself. People have died for less. That man didn't think much of that girl's life, now did he? I agreed with that statement. My cigarette already burned out, leaving no reason to stay outside. I still had time to clear my head and cancel all of this. I told the other man the name of the manager, although we could have easily found it by checking today's news. He walked off into the night with a promise to call in the next few days. I wanted to regret what I just put into motion. Abby's face and thinking of her parents needing to bury her removed all feelings of doubt. That man needed to be taken care of before we hurt another person. Turns out, we didn't stop that from happening. The call came 2 nights after I met the man at the bar. I wanted to believe I dreamed up the entire encounter. An unknown number came through on my cell. Right away, I knew it wasn't a scam caller. I let it ring for a moment, letting my thumb hover over the screen. "Are you doing anything tonight?" the voice asked, not even bothering to confirm he got the right number. We didn't even introduce ourselves yet, and we were now planning a murder. "Tonight?" I questioned, pulse racing. "Best to get it done and over with, unless you have something more important to do. Got a hot date?" He finished the question with a faint laugh. Still a chance to back out, I reminded myself. I shook my head and steeled my resolve. My entire body wants to run from my phone, but my brain forces me to stay still. "We can do this tonight," I told him, the world weighing on my shoulders. "Great, come and pick me up at the bar we met at. I don't have a car." He hung up, leaving me to stew on what I was doing. We were going to kill someone. Did that put me on the same level as the manager? No, I decided. He assaulted Abby, then killed her. I felt positive the manager only strangled her when he panicked, thinking she might report him to the police. That man did not deserve the freedom he killed a girl for. My muscles tensed the entire drive to the bar. The sun was already set due to how late in the season it becomes. No one else was really out on the roads, and that suited me just fine. Every time a car passed by, it felt like they knew what my plans were for the night. That a driver would pull over and call the police to stop us. No one but myself and the accomplice knew of the plan, though. I saw him waiting outside and didn't stub out a cigarette when he got into the passenger seat. He rolled down the window to let the smoke out. I hated the idea of my car smelling of smoke, but was too wired to bring it up. "Should we, give each other our names?" I finally asked. He put a location in his phone and put the volume up for directions so I knew where to go. His face turned into a smile that didn't suit someone on the way to do such a grim task. "You don't need to give me yours, but I go by Graves," he explained. I stopped at a red light and looked him over. Grey suit jacket, grey pants, grey hair and eyes. The colour reminded me of a gravestone. Rolling my eyes, I focused on the road again. "Isn't that a bit on the nose?" I said, causing him to laugh a little. That calmed me down enough to keep driving. The GPS directed us to a regular neighbourhood, one a bit more run down than the other, but still a place where people can raise their kids. The grass on each lawn is a different length, showing no HOA put up shop here. I parked across the street from the address given, all the blood rushing back from my limbs into my head, thinking how we were going to do this. Were we going to what? Break in? Shoot him? Stab him? Would it be bloody? The lights were on, so we needed to wait until ones inside went to sleep. What if he did for someone else? I didn't get a chance to ask any of these questions. Graves got out of the car and started to walk right over to the house. "Hey, wait!" I called after him. He already reached the front door by the time I got halfway across the road. He knocked and patiently waited. Really? He was just going to knock? An older woman opened the door and my heart sank. We had the wrong house. I knew it. We needed to get the hell out of there. To my horror, he pushed past her, calling out the manager's name. This already turned into a huge mess. The woman didn't notice me and was more worried about the strange man inside her house. I stopped at the open doorway, as if an invisible force field kept me out. I pushed past it, my entire body itching. Graves, what the hell are you doing? I questioned, but my voice lacked any force. I saw the woman and wanted to go over to her to explain I was going to drag the intruder the hell out of her house. A sight caused me to freeze. Graves suddenly started to run through the open doorway. A second person easily heard running towards the back door. In under a minute, he came back dragging my old night manager into the living room by his shirt collar. The woman started to scream, begging us to leave and demanded to know what we wanted with her son. I couldn't answer her. I never imagined another person getting dragged into all this and felt lost. There was no way I could tell her we arrived to kill her son, but Graves could say those words. This man killed an innocent little girl, so we decided he shouldn't be able to live anymore. He answered in such a calm voice, it caused my blood to turn to ice water. The mother threw herself on the manager, making Graves to let go of this shirt. Neither of them tried to run as she sobbed, holding her adult son. Don't! He's the only thing I have left of my husband. I can't lose them both, she begged in a heavy voice. I honestly didn't care about that. This man should be in prison, and because he wasn't a girl, died. She wasn't entitled to keeping a child when that meant another set of parents needed to bury theirs. She was a little slut, that. Graves didn't let the man finish his sentence. He kicked out his foot, smashing the manager's nose with his heel. Blood sprayed and poured down his face. The nose broke from the kick from the looks of things. The next few moments went by so fast, none of us really had a chance to process it. The manager grabbed a gun that he had in his waistband of his sweatpants. His mother saw the weapon and threw herself into a struggling match, trying to get it away. She didn't want to watch her son kill anyone, or watch someone hurt a little boy. I took 2 steps forward, ready to end this fight and just leave. All noise disappeared to be replaced by one muffled pop between the two of them. We all became as still as statues, Graves staring down, his grey eyes wide in an unreadable emotion. The mother fell to the side and I ran over to her, frantic. Blood soaked through her dress from a small point in her chest. My hands were flying to the spot, putting pressure on it in a vain attempt to save her life. Warm blood seeped through my fingers, making them feel slick and sticky at the same time. I cried, begging for someone to call for help. The others in the room were not moving in the slightest. Graves spoke first. A small snicker of a laugh came, then another. Soon he bent over to let out a terrible wheezing again. I hated him at that moment for that. I wanted to revenge for Abby, not get another innocent person killed. His name clicked, and I realised he really picked something incredibly accurate for his gruesome hobby. His laughing fit made the manager snap. He turned the weapon on Graves, getting one shot off. The man turned into a blur of grey. Suddenly, he was on the ground floor behind the man with the gun, holding his wrists by wrapping his arms around the other man. I watched Graves force the manager to bring the barrel of the gun ever closer to under his own chin. The manager struggled, but Graves didn't even look as if he put that much strength into forcing the man's arms back. My brain caught up too slowly. I shouted for him to stop at the same moment the gun went off a second time. Graves stood up, wrinkles appearing at the corner of his eyes from a wide smile. 2 died because of me. I never should have spoken to this man. She's dead. Let's go, Graves said in a soft voice that made my skin crawl. I looked down at the mother, her eyes still open, but nothing behind them. I couldn't move my legs. Nothing happened when I told myself to stand up. The other man grabbed a hold of my upper arm and forcefully made me to stand. Step by step, we left the house. I finally wondered why no one called the police yet, or came to see what happened due to all the noise. I was shoved into my passenger seat, and Graves starting the car to leave behind the crime scene. We drove for an unknown amount of time. My brain doesn't process anything because of the shock. I got dragged out of the car again and into a bathroom. I finally realised he parked at a truck stop and wanted me to use the bathroom sink to wash the blood off my hands. Seeing the dark colour staining my hands, I nearly got sick. I hurled over to the line of sinks and didn't bother with soap. I just let the hot water run over my hands, scrubbing with tears coming from my eyes. I stayed at the sink for a while, using as much soap as I could, and yet the blood stuck. My hands became raw from scrubbing, but I couldn't stop. I let out a sound of fear when Graves stood behind to wrap his hands around mine. He forced them under the water, keeping them still. He also turned the temperature down, so I stopped burning the layers of skin off of them. Don't burn yourself, let them soak. Blood gets under your nails and stays for a while. His voice right beside my ear made my body shake. Having him like this looked so similar to how he forced the manager to shoot himself. The embrace held a dark undertone instead of comforting. My eyes went to the mirror and nearly fainted seeing a shadow come over his face, his pupils shining a bright white in the dark. A light flickered off in the bathroom, then another. The room turned pitch black, with only 2 pinpricks of white lights coming from his eyes. A hot breath came on my neck. I jerked back my hands, only to have him interlace his fingers through my own, making them stay under the running water. My heart stopped for a second when another set of eyes appeared in the mirror. Then another more of those pinpricks of light swam out through the dark. I heard the sounds of the faces appearing at my back, but could only see the lights, each head darting back and forth, twisting into each other. Soft sounds of different animals echoed through the small bathroom, almost overpowering the boiling water. I haven't eaten a good meal in some time. Would be so kind as to spare. Graves' voice changed, sounded deeper and rough, almost inhuman. He thankfully didn't get a chance to finish the question. A truck opened the bathroom door, the lights coming back on the moment the other person stepped inside. Graves returned to a human form, and his body tensed when we were caught in such an odd position. Through my fear, I realised the other man was still holding my hands from behind. That made the whole situation look very different to the newcomer. I'm going to leave if you guys want to finish what you're doing, the trucker offered in an embarrassed drawl. We were just leaving, the monster of the man said, almost sounding embarrassed. He grabbed me around my waist so we could flee the bathroom and back to my car. I didn't get inside, just leaned against it. Slowly falling down the side into the ground, wet hands starting to freeze in the night air. The sensation gives me something else to focus on. Sorry for that little moment. I really haven't eaten much in a bit. Lost control for a second. Graves apologised and sat on the curb nearby. He pulled out a smoke, but his lighter gave out on him. He used a set of matches he picked up from some hotel or casino. I should have got the hell out of there, but the night drained my strength. The woman is dead. I brought you there. I killed her, I said, finally pushing the words out. Her son brought the gun, grabbed it, kept his finger on the trigger. Killed a girl that caused you to be upset enough to bring me along. He's more at fault than anyone, he offered. Then why can't I forgive myself? Why don't I feel better at all knowing it won't hurt anyone else? Why am I... My words faded, and I broke out into tears. Had sobbing that hurt my chest. The breakdown was so heavy and hard, it only lasted a few minutes. My body couldn't keep crying at that pace. The other man didn't say anything or look disgusted to my sudden breakdown. He lit another cigarette off his nearly finished one. Walking over, he bent over to place the one end so close to my lips, he nearly forced it in my mouth. You're a good person, and I'm not. I like watching people like you go through shit like this. If you're going to hate anyone, hate me for even offering to kill that man in the first place. I accepted the smoke, hurting my lungs so soon after I nearly busted a rib from sobbing. I wanted to hate Graves, but he made it very hard when he sounded so damn gentle. He straightened up, and I punched his leg for giving so many mixed signals. He took the hit, but skittered away before I could get him again. Now what? I asked, feeling exhausted. I leave. You'll never see me again. You'll never be legally responsible for their deaths, and you'll blame yourself over what happened for the rest of your life, he explained with a shrug. I stared at him, trying to figure him out. He wasn't human, that was for certain. I ugly accepted that idea right away. It was natural for a monster to kill and hurt people without a second thought or reason, and yet a feeling nagged in the back of my mind. He was a monster. No human could ever see him as anything but that. The ash on my cigarette dropped on my pants, and I let a small ember slightly burn my jeans. The only way Graves made connections was in a negative way. I would never really be able to forget about this night, and deep down, he wanted that. Maybe more than he wanted to have fun watching others die or suffer by his own hands. "You're a pretty lonely person, aren't you?" I asked. My words caught him off guard. I don't think anyone ever asked him such a thing before. An expression came over his face that didn't suit him in the slightest, confirming my theory. He shoved his hands deep into his pants pocket to try to think of a way to dispute what I said. "I need to get going. It's not best if I hang around you this hungry. I might just take a bite and that won't do at all." I didn't argue over him leaving. He mentioned he didn't have a car, but I knew he would have no problem getting to wherever he needed to be next. I debated on calling the cops, then decided against it. If he wasn't human, he must have a way to sway the police in the way he wants. No, Grace would keep travelling around the same ordeal to people like me. If for some reason you come across him, you really need to keep his name in mind. Taking revenge always ends up with collateral damage. Even if Mother didn't die that night, she would have lost someone she loved. Death ripples outwards. Regardless if the person is loved or not, death changes the world in ways you might not understand. You just need to decide if you're able to deal with the unforeseen aftermath of your actions. So this whole situation is incredibly hard to explain. But since having a son and seeing him react to these events, I have to reach out to others who may know what's going on or can relate. Since I was younger, I've always been able to see things. I've had incredibly vivid dreams that came true. I've heard voices and see things, and on occasions, my friends and family have heard or seen what I have seen as well. They didn't believe me until then. These dreams I had have always been disturbing, mostly involving this creature that shapeshifts and scares me in my dreams. It has no eyes, and I always called them abyss eyes as a kid. The creature has appeared to me as a cat and as a lizard. It always appears in very traumatic periods in my dreams and has spoken to me on many occasions. Recently, I was speaking with a good friend of mine about one of his friends, and he mentioned that friend could sense and see things. Well, he mentioned how this friend had been seeing something in the back of who they will call the creepy kid. Keep in mind, creepy kid has been complaining of nightmares and seeing things. This creepy kid left one night, and the family said he saw this being on his shoulders. It was all hunched, had a long nose, and absolutely no eyes. I flipped out. I didn't know what to think of it, because I haven't mentioned those dreams I had to anyone. There's also this family legend of a shadow creature that we call the Black Cat. He's not a cat, he's a shadow being that's tall, slinky, and fast. My great-grandmother, who was extremely Mormon and skeptical of these things, said it chased her and her son through the woods years ago. There have been numerous occasions I've seen him slinking in my house as a child, or even whispering to me, even though I'm unable to make out what he's saying. My friends have seen him numerous times, and they're also freaked out by the occurrence. Recently, I was given tarot cards, which I found I'm incredibly gifted with. I haven't given an accurate reading yet. But since receiving them, what's been going on has intensified. I've woken up in the middle of the night to voices, shadows moving, and more. My son has even reacted to these events, and he's afraid to go to sleep on his own. The other night, I woke up to something standing above me. It was horrifying. This is an actual experience I had, and it still freaks me out to this day. Growing up, I had multiple little paranormal experiences. I was always very skeptical, so the experiences I had were genuine, and I tried my best to explain away and couldn't. Many of them would happen even with company or family around to see it as well, so I knew I wasn't imagining it. As a teenager, I started getting a little too interested in the paranormal and not being scared of anything. I got a little cocky at times, and at some point I guess I started to dabble with something I shouldn't have, so it got a bit too intense for me. I would talk about the things that happened or mention spirits or attempt to talk to presences I couldn't see. And it would, as I like to call it, stir shit up. So when I was a teenager, I had this friend. He would be in mid-conversation with me and randomly trail off on some weird shit that sounded creepy and didn't make any sense. Then come to and not have any clue what he said and be like, whatever man, I don't know what you're talking about, and continue on the normal conversation like nothing happened. Usually it ended at that. But when we were about 15, he went into one of these things, kind of like a trance or whatever, as we were on the phone. He said something like, follow the tracks to your right. Then on your right again, near the end, you'll come to their resting place. I'll explain the layout of where I was living because it's important for the next parts. I lived in a pretty nice trailer park off a main road in a small town, heavily wooded and nowhere near town. The main driveway came down the middle of the trailer park and ended the river. A little past the dead end was an embankment, and at the bottom was a railroad track that was very rarely used. To the right, it dead-ended in some woods, with one side being at the back of an abandoned old mill. The other side had a pretty dense set of woods behind a neighbourhood. So I followed his weird cryptic directions after getting off the phone. It was late afternoon in summer. I heard the railroad tracks and head right towards the end. At some point before the end, I hear footsteps in the woods on my right. Being curious, I headed up the embankment and towards the noise. There was nobody there, but I did see a small graveyard curiously tucked away in those woods behind a neighbourhood. Like a small family plot, ranging from the early 1700s to the very early 1900s. Only about 20 markers. I was intrigued and of course brought that friend later, and he was weirded out, insisting he had no idea it was there. But he wasn't the lying type, so I believed him. It became a hangout spot of mine as I was dumb and brave, and I would go there at night at all hours, acting fearless. Nothing really weird ever happened there, so moving on. Another day, another conversation, and Buddy randomly breaks into another trance. He says, head to the tracks, cross them, and when you enter the woods, you will see them. My cocky self immediately does just that. Late afternoon once again. This time, I head to the tracks behind the trailer park, but I cross them, which goes through a bit of woods, comes into a clearing with an old mill on the left. On the right is miles out to the power lines cutting through the woods, supplying all the random neighbourhoods scattered throughout the area. Straight ahead across the street for the mill is a more dense wooded area, so following those directions again, I head towards the tree line. The moment I set foot into the tree line, I heard branches snapping and immediately saw just the black shadow or silhouette of a guy, in all black on a black horse, galloping through the woods away from me and towards the left, disappearing into the trees. I was a bit shocked, as it was not common to see horses around my town at all. But being cocky and brave, I decided to head where he came from, which was to the right, in the edge of the tree line, following the cutout of the power lines. Near the edge of the tree line, I found an old collapsed horse stable. Literally nothing else near it. There was another neighbourhood about a mile in the direction of where he disappeared, but nothing else around the stable. So being intrigued and a little freaked out, I went to call my buddy and tell him. The following day, I bring him with me to show my findings because he just refused to believe me, and I was getting suspicious of him, playing stupid possibly. But the most unbelievable part, as we entered the tree line, where I saw the horseman the day before, we both saw him taking the same path as I did previously. Broad daylight, clear as possible. There was no way we both imagined it. Both of us were a little freaked out, but we continued, and I showed him the stable. The strangest part of all was I brought a couple of other friends to see the stable, and each time he appeared to us.